Whenever I start a new Marvel video, one of the first things I look at is how many comics the character I'm going to be talking about has appeared in. This is a good number to have in my brain as I talk. It'll give me an estimate of how well that character is known to the general public. But that estimate can sometimes be pretty rough. Number of appearances alone does not nearly tell the complete story of a character, and sometimes it can raise more questions than answers. Hellcat is a character where that definitely applies. Let's take a look at some other examples to showcase what I mean. Luna Snow, a decently popular Marvel character, especially recently, but not one with a lot of comic appearances, only 37 issues in total. This makes perfect sense, though. Luna's popularity is almost entirely due to video games, especially Marvel Rivals, and that hasn't really translated to other media yet. Let's take a look at another one, Star-Lord. That's a name that we all definitely know. He's a more recent character than you might think, first debuting in 2004, but in the relatively short time since then, he's racked up a respectable 338 appearances. Let's take it up a notch again with my favorite superhero, Moon Knight. Now, Moon Knight is not as popular as Star-Lord, at least not with general audiences, but he's been around for decades longer, and therefore he has appeared 558 times. And then there's Hellcat, who, despite her relative obscurity in the modern day, has a staggering 736 appearances to her name. That is more than Galactus, it's more than Ghost Rider, it's almost twice as many appearances as Loki. So who the hell is Hellcat, and why has she been in so many comics? The answer to that is quite a wild story, because Hellcat doesn't just have a lot of appearances, she also boasts maybe the biggest change in status quo among any Marvel character at the entire company. In today's video, we are going to be starting off old school, and I don't even mean old school Marvel, because this actually predates Marvel. So without further ado, let's talk about Hellcat and how this character has changed drastically with the times around her. As promised, we are going to zoom back in time literally immediately to the year 1944. Marvel was not around at this point, but the company that would eventually evolve and rebrand into Marvel was. At this point in history, it was known as Timely Comics. One of Timely's first productions was called Miss America Magazine, and magazine is the key word there. This was not a comic book, at least not exclusively. Miss America Magazine had news and articles. In fact, it was mostly those. But it did have a couple comic segments, and one of them introduces us to a character named Patsy Walker. Patsy has nothing to do with superheroes, at least not yet. She is a normal teenage girl doing normal teenage things, but amped up to sitcom levels of comedy and drama. You know, like Archie comics? Yeah, it's basically that. That style of comic was really popular at the time, and this was one of many similar books releasing. Patsy's first ever comic shows her fawning over a famous singer, very subtly named Swoon Strong, and hoping to ask him to be her date to her high school prom. Patsy does not get to ask out Mr. Strong, however, as her crush is stolen by her rich girl rival, Hetty Wolf. Distraught by this, Patsy ends up settling, basically, and instead goes to the dance with her school friend, Buzz Baxter. Then, in a moment of vindication, at the dance, Swoon Strong's toupee falls off, revealing that he is actually bald. Hetty is mortified, and justice is served. Hilarious. In the 1940s, I guess. Uncomplicated as this comic is, it does give us the three characters who are most important to this era of Hellcat lore. First off, obviously Patsy herself, secondly Buzz as her main love interest, and third, Hetty as her friend and frequent rival. Now, apparently, after this debut, Patsy caught on with readers pretty quickly. Have I read every Patsy Walker comic from the 40s to 60s era? No, because there are a lot of them. Miss America magazine ran for 92 issues, with Patsy appearing in almost all of them. This made her popular enough to get her own series, which ran for a very respectable 124 issues. The Patsy Walker self-titled comic was also popular enough to get a separate spin-off book called Patsy and Hetty, and that one also ran for 110 issues. If that's not enough, there was another spin-off called Patsy and Her Pals, which had 29 issues, and that's not even touching on the specials and guest appearances. Patsy Walker's Fashion Parade, A Date with Patsy, Teen Comics, which is not the most creative name, but I guess it's honest advertising. Totaling all of these up, Patsy Walker has almost 400 appearances during this time, most of which are in books where she is the title character star. People loved Patsy, and I'm sure as many of you have already figured out, this is the reason why her number of appearances is so high. So that answers one of the mysteries from the intro pretty early into the video, but it does not answer why she is a superhero now, and it also raises another question. Are these almost 400 Archie comic-style sitcom books canon to the Marvel universe? The answer is yes, they are, but it's a little bit more complicated than just that. If it really was as easy as yes, they are canon, this would not make a very good YouTube video. Let's tell this story chronologically though. For the first 21 years of her existence, Patsy Walker had nothing to do with Marvel. She was published by Marvel eventually. Patsy's comics continued through Timely's rebrand into Atlas Comics, and then Atlas Comics' rebrand into Marvel Comics. But Patsy wasn't really part of the universe, she was just doing her own thing. That would change in 1965's Fantastic Four Annual Special, a very big comic, in fact arguably one of the most important in Marvel history, as this is the issue with the wedding of Susan Storm and Reed Richards. The Richards wedding was a huge event in a couple of different ways. For one, it was a big deal for readers and Marvel as a company, as this would define the dynamics of the Fantastic Four literally forever going forward. But since the FF are big celebrities even in-universe, their wedding was attended by a lot of popular Marvel characters. As you can see from this cover alone, basically every character that was important at the time, heroes and villains, welcome and unwelcome, made an appearance. And as such, the area outside the Baxter building was filled with both press and fans hoping to get a glimpse of all the heroes as they went inside. In this crowd of onlookers, we get exactly one panel of Patsy Walker and Hetty Wolf, not invited to the wedding, but just there as excited civilians. Each of them get one line of dialogue, and for Patsy's part, she is marveling at how hot Tony Stark is. Which, great news, Patsy, that is going to happen for you, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Now, these two are not remotely plot relevant in this issue. Their presence is just an Easter egg, but a pretty clever one. Patsy had been a popular character at the company for over 20 years, and so in this big event issue, here she is just for fun. But it did introduce the idea that Patsy Walker might be Marvel canon, and eventually that would get followed up on. Unfortunately for Patsy though, her popularity was starting to drop off during this time. That Fantastic Four comic was again in 1965, and Patsy Walker's last solo comic, or technically issue 110 of Patsy and Hetty, would come in 1967. After this, she didn't get anything for several years, and when she was brought back, it was in a very different way. Now we're going to skip forward 5 years and end up at a Beast comic. Like Hank McCoy Beast, and actually a wildly important one to the history of this character. This comic, Amazing Adventures featuring the Beast, was the one in which his appearance changed to what we know Beast as today. This is the arc where Hank underwent secondary mutation and gained fur. In fact, it happened just a few issues before Patsy shows up again. Around this time, Hank McCoy was working as a researcher for a group called the Brand Corporation. Brand was doing a lot of government contracting, and in issue 13 of Amazing Adventures, they gain a new member, a government liaison of sorts in the form of Air Force Captain Buzz Baxter. He's grown up now, of course, no longer the teenager from the 40s, and when we first see him at this age, he is touring the facilities of his new job alongside his now wife, Patsy Walker. Patsy, technically Patsy Baxter at this point, is not a major character in this issue or the next one. The more important of the two is Buzz, who is actually an antagonist as he's trying to capture not Hank McCoy, but the Beast, who at this point everyone thinks is a different guy. Remember, this is right after Beast transformed again, and so the current public thinking is not that Dr. Hank McCoy is a mutant, it is that the Beast is a separate supervillain who has kidnapped Dr. McCoy, and wanting both to find one of his researchers and also take down the villain, Captain Baxter begins a manhunt. Hank, who is in the process of trying to revert from his monstrous form, manages to throw his pursuers off the trail by using a quick and kind of shoddy human disguise. But Captain Baxter is still suspicious, and also, importantly, is being a jerk the entire time. For reasons that we will find out later, he is no longer the bumbling sitcom love interest that he was 2 decades ago. Now, he's awful and is extremely sexist. Not even just like this is a comic from the 1970s sexist, no, he is actively awful to Patsy. This would come back to bite him though, as shortly after his first hunt for Hank, Beast would get extremely injured in a fight with an unrelated supervillain, and in a state of near death and delirium, he would wander into the first shelter he could find, which by pure coincidence was the home of the Baxters. Fortunately, Buzz is not home at the time. The only one there is Patsy, and while she considers calling her husband about the monster that just passed out on her floor, seeing how badly hurt he is and being a generally kind person, Patsy decides to treat his injuries so that he doesn't bleed out and die before they can ask him any questions. The moment he wakes up, Hank immediately tries to book it, but is stopped in his tracks as Patsy now apparently knows his secret identity. It turns out that he was so delirious, he was hallucinating while he was waking up, and in the process of that, told Patsy what his actual name is. So now, she has quite a bit of leverage over him. Then, in a very mysterious turn, Patsy tells Hank to sit down as she has something to say to him. But before we find out what that is, the scene cuts away. Next, we just see Beast out doing his thing, once again hiding his secret identity. And when he gets confronted by Captain Baxter again later in the issue, Patsy covers for him, saying that she saw Hank McCoy while Beast was active, meaning that the two cannot be one and the same. Buzz is confused and more than a little skeptical, but does not want to deny an apparent eyewitness account from his wife, and therefore Hank McCoy is in the clear. Why did she do this, and what was the conversation that the two had after Beast woke up? We don't know yet. The comic keeps it intentionally mysterious, and what actually happened there would not be revealed for a couple more years. Though, of course, we do not have to wait years, we can go ahead and skip forward to an Avengers comic from 1975. Though this is not as wild of a shift as it might seem, this was during a time when Beast was on the team, or at least trying out for the team. Yes, even the Avengers hold tryouts, and Beast was basically a provisional member for a while. We are reintroduced to Patsy Walker again, as she has divorced her horrible husband, when she just kind of barges into the Avengers headquarters looking for Beast, and starts yelling at him in the middle of a team meeting. After talking to Beast for just a second, Patsy turns to the entire team and announces to Earth's mightiest heroes that the Beast's real identity is Dr. Hank McCoy. And the heroes respond, "Yeah, we know that already." This is where we get the first bit of detail on what the conversation between these 2 years earlier had entailed. Apparently, in exchange for Patsy keeping his identity a secret, Beast had promised her something. We don't know what that is yet, but in the years since, he has decided not to have a secret identity, and so Patsy doesn't really have anything to hold over him anymore. However, being a generally good guy, or at least being a generally good guy back in this era, Beast decides that he will keep his promise since she kept her end of it for all this time. Again, Beast does not say what this promise was, but after confirming that he did indeed make some kind of deal, he turns to Captain America and says, "Hey, I would like to bring Patsy Walker on our Avengers mission tonight, just to observe." If this sounds a little bit weird, yeah, it absolutely is, and the rest of the team does not really want this random woman to accompany them, but after Beast brings up the fact that Cap himself once brought kid sidekicks along on missions, he relents, and so Patsy is joining this time. What is the mission that she is tagging along for, you might ask? Well, the Avengers are infiltrating and investigating the Brand Corporation. And guess who's there running their security still years later? It's Buzz Baxter. And he definitely notices that his ex-wife is with the Avengers for some reason. This does absolutely nothing to deter him from deploying his best security measures though, and his best is pretty good, as the Brand Corporation facility is defended by a very weird team of quote-unquote superheroes called the Squadron Supreme. We'll go over why I said quote-unquote heroes in a second, but for now, the Squadron Supreme does win and is able to take out the Avengers, capturing them, and of course, Patsy in the process. They all get put in a magical energy cage and then kind of just sidelined there for a while. There were 2 storylines happening in this arc. Only half the Avengers were doing the Brand Corporation thing. The other half were going on a time travel adventure and fighting Kang. And that kind of took priority for the next few issues, but we would get back to the Patsy team eventually. After their little narrative timeout in the energy box, the Avengers escape in actually a pretty clever way. Captain America's shield can pass through the energy, but they can't really use that to escape because only the shield, being made of vibranium, can get by. So what Cap does is hold the shield up directly inside of the energy wall, effectively turning a little circle of it solid, and then Vision phases through the shield, allowing him to get out and then turn off the cage from the outside. Very cool, and not really relevant to Patsy specifically, but interesting enough that I wanted to call attention to it. Now the Avengers are out of the cage, but they are still in the middle of the Brand facility, and whatever shady stuff Brand was working on in here, they do not want the Avengers getting out with information of it, and deploy a whole internal guided missile system. Missiles are not usually that big of a deal for the Avengers, of course, but they do also have a normal human woman to protect, and that's largely what this big sequence is. The Avengers doing a bunch of big, complicated acrobatic moves to keep Patsy from getting exploded. On that note, I just want to make it extra clear that at this point right now, Patsy Walker is still just a person. Yes, she is suddenly involved in superhero shenanigans, but she as a character is fundamentally identical to the one from the 40s comics, just grown up by 10 to 15 years. There's a great panel actually where Iron Man and Captain America are quipping back and forth at each other, and Patsy is running for her life, stunned that they are joking while they are getting a bunch of missiles fired at them. The comic really wants to point out that she is the one normal one here, because that is about to shift. As the Avengers try to find their way out of this very complicated lab, they stumble into a sort of armory area, and find laying there the superhero costume of an old vigilante named the Cat. The Cat was a pre-existing Marvel character, but not an extremely popular one, at least not in this identity. She only wore this suit for a couple of issues before getting a superpower upgrade, from which point on she was known as Tigra. Yes, this is Greer Nelson, who does still appear in comics even in the modern day. The Cat costume was technologically advanced and did give its wearer minor superpowers, but after Tigra was upgraded and got her powers integrated directly into her body, she no longer needed the suit, and apparently it had somehow come into the possession of the Brand Corporation. And, well, you've heard me talk about Hellcat enough in this video that it should not take a genius to see where this is going. It is here, as the Avengers and Patsy Walker are in this armory looking at the costume, that we get a big flashback scene, revealing more details of Patsy's own origin, and finally, the exact details of the talk she had with Beast. This flashback establishes that Patsy Walker was always a fan of superheroes. This was, of course, not present in her original series because the big superhero boom of the 60s hadn't happened yet, but it does make enough sense in the context of the Marvel Universe. Superheroes are not fictional here, they are real-world celebrities, and Patsy followed all of their adventures. The flashback even briefly references her appearance in the Fantastic Four wedding special, which is a very nice touch, and then cuts to her own wedding to Buzz. This is where it takes a little bit of a turn, as apparently shortly after the two were married, Buzz Baxter went off to the Vietnam War and came back with severe PTSD. Now, of course, this being in the mid-70s, they don't acknowledge that exactly in the same way that we would today, but it's very clear that that is what happened. They say he came back, but different, and he was apparently very angry, frustrated all the time. He would yell at Patsy at the smallest inconveniences, and eventually went to the Brand Corporation, where he got more and more involved in their shady business, just kind of amplifying his newfound angry personality. This spirals into his obsession with catching Beast, and finally, after 3 years, the conversation, in which Patsy promises to keep Dr. McCoy's secret if he makes her into a superhero. And now I need to stop and make something abundantly clear to people who are not stopping to read every panel and page that I show you, which is completely understandable. This sounds like a crazy request, because it is, and the comic absolutely presents it as that, which leads to one of the best and most defining features of Patsy's character. She's kind of insane. Patsy Walker is so confident that it borders on delusional. In any given situation, she is usually more self-assured than she should be. And this is not a consequence of poor writing or favoritism or anything like that. It is absolutely the intent. The point of Patsy Walker as a character is that she is usually a regular person who is really, really sure that she can be a good superhero. And sometimes she can, sometimes she can't. She will absolutely meet consequences of that, and it's what makes her character so interesting. So just keep that in mind going forward. So, on that note, after getting Patsy's request to become a superhero in exchange for secrecy, Beast's immediate response is to go, "Lady, are you nuts?" And Patsy says, "Yeah, maybe I am, but you're also kind of crazy. You turned yourself into a monster man. You know all the superheroes. Call Reed Richards, get me a costume with a power or a super soldier serum or something." And at this point, Hank McCoy's entire life is on the line because the wife of the military guy hunting him now knows his secret identity. And so he goes, yeah, you're crazy, but okay, I will make that deal." Beast is then gone, and Patsy spends the next several years trying to talk to him again so that she can yell at him for not keeping up his end of the deal. And when she finally makes her way all the way to Avengers headquarters, I guess he relents and agrees to let her at least come along on this one mission, which then became this disaster. This leads to, dead seriously, one of the funniest comic book interactions I've ever seen in my life. This sequence so far has been Captain America picking up the cat mask and asking Patsy if she wants to put it on just for this operation so she'll be a little bit safer. Then we get the whole multi-page flashback where Patsy explains her childhood dream, ending with a close-up on her face as she accepts the offer. She says yes, she's finally going to get to be a superhero after all these years, and you turn the page and the next line of dialogue is Steve immediately going, "No, sorry, I've changed my mind. This is not a very good idea at all, actually." Marvel, if you watch my videos, I desperately need you to put Hellcat in the MCU or something animated, whatever, just so I can see the comedic timing of this in a video format, because it would be so incredibly funny. This flashback is like tearful levels of emotional. It's talking about her husband's PTSD and all the trauma that she was facing, and then it cuts to Steve just going, no, maybe we shouldn't give this random woman superpowers. That's crazy, actually. So now, hopefully, you see what I mean about Patsy's overconfidence kind of being the point of the character. It is something that the comics will acknowledge a lot. Regardless of that, she does end up getting the costume during this scene. She takes it out of Cap's hands, and the Avengers let her put it on because, yeah, I mean, Beast already got them into this incredibly dumb situation, and since the suit does give its wearer powers, this random civilian will technically be safer with it on than without it. Thus, through a combination of Hank McCoy being an idiot and a series of wild coincidences, Patsy Walker, teenage star from the 1940s, has been upgraded into Hellcat. It is one of the funniest origins Marvel has ever put on the page, and that vibe is just gonna continue. What are her powers though? Well, for now, they're pretty straightforward. The easiest way that I can describe it is that the Hellcat suit kinda just works on Power Rangers logic, where when you're wearing it, it amps up your physical capabilities and also just makes it so that you immediately know how to fight, which is going to be very relevant very soon because the Avengers are about to leave the Brand Corporation base, but not by their own accord. Remember how I said that there was a group of quote-unquote heroes, the Squadron Supreme, that the Avengers were fighting? Yeah, the Squadron Supreme is from another universe. This arc is also an early multiverse storyline, and to get the Avengers out of their base, the Brand Corporation uses a weird machine to just teleport the Avengers and the Squadron back to the Squadron's home reality. The Squadron is a pastiche of the Justice League. Most of their members are direct parallels to DC characters, and the team as a whole is heroic, but heroic in a very over-the-top sense. They are usually represented as very tyrannical and violent in their quote-unquote heroism, and so even though they are back on their homeworld with the Avengers, the fight is not stopping anytime soon. Patsy, despite having gotten her powers about 10 minutes ago at this point, jumps into battle immediately and tries to attack Hyperion, who is the Squadron's Superman analog. She gets in one hit, probably just because her charge was so dumb that it was unexpected, and this is the last hit she will get in for the remainder of the battle. Thankfully, and probably expectedly, one of the main abilities provided by the cat suit is incredibly fast reflexes, and they are instinctive enough that she is able to dodge Hyperion's counterattack. For at least a couple seconds, we see her dodging like 2 hits, and then she promptly gets defeated. Thankfully, as the other Avengers are fighting, Vision is off being tactical, and he's able to go do some other stuff that diffuses the combat, so Hellcat does not get flattened in her first fight. Her next couple fights don't necessarily go much better, but after jumping so fast into the deep end, she is slowly learning how to swim, and by the time the Avengers figure out how to return to their home reality, she is starting to get the hang of it. Back in their world, all they have to do is fight a bunch of nameless goons, and this is well within Hellcat's enhanced range already. The team is then defeated when Brand calls a stronger supervillain to the scene, but they are not killed on the spot, and instead are all strapped into a weird science device called the Electro-Incinerogram, which, wow, that's a comic book science name if I've ever heard one, by Buzz Baxter. This brings us to the actually pretty good conclusion to Patsy Walker's first arc as Hellcat, where Buzz tries to taunt his ex-wife as she's strapped into the machine, mocking her for remaining so happy and upbeat while he had to go out and face the horrors of the world. As funny as Hellcat's origin has been up to this point, this sequence is quite serious. It really acknowledges that Patsy was abused by her former high school sweetheart, and it pretty clearly shows that he was willing to lash out physically as well as verbally. But here we get to see Hellcat standing up to him for the first time, and of course she wins the fight, freeing the Avengers and proving that while she is kind of overconfident and makes a lot of dumb decisions, when things come down to it, she can stand up to the test of being a superhero and earn that costume she's been wearing this whole time. Where this goes from here, though, is maybe not what you would expect. You would think after this arc, Patsy would join the Avengers, but no, she does not do that, instead choosing to go with Moondragon, who I know I have not mentioned in this video up to this point, so let me do a quick refresher on that. Remember how I said that there were like 2 arcs going on at this point? There was the thing with the Brand Corporation and Hellcat, and then the other half of the Avengers was going on a big Kang adventure. Yeah, Moondragon was a character on that Kang adventure, so she kind of just shows up at the end of this when the 2 storylines converge. Moondragon's whole thing is complicated and outside the scope of this video. All you really need to know for now is that she's like a psychic space priestess who lived on Titan, as in the moon of Saturn. Moondragon is also the daughter of Drax the Destroyer, which I know is a wild thing to drop and then move on from, but maybe a video for another time. Moondragon was one of the people trying out for the Avengers alongside Beast. She was just with the other team during their sort of provisionary missions. However, at the end of it, she decides not to join the team and returns to Titan, taking Patsy with her to train her in the ways of being a superhero. So Patsy actually does the kind of mature thing here and does not dive headfirst into more superheroics, instead choosing to get some actual training in first. This would be her last appearance in Avengers, and she would evidently remain on Titan for several months, training not just in combat, but also in psychic ability. Apparently, Patsy Walker had latent psionic talent, which Moondragon helped her develop. Kind of out of the blue, but yeah, from this point forward, Hellcat also has minor psychic powers in addition to her cat-enhanced combat powers. After her training was complete, Patsy would return to Earth and join the Defenders. This is where the majority of Hellcat's appearances are, and note I make the distinction between Hellcat and Patsy Walker. Most of her time as a superhero would be with this team, though from here on out she was part of the larger Marvel universe. Her time on the Avengers was really just her origin arc, and from here she appears in more crossovers. Now, she's in a lot of Defenders books, and we're not going to be doing a play-by-play of all of them, but there are 2 points in this era that are really important to note. The first one is that Defenders really establishes how the canon of the old 40s teen comics works. Remember a while ago, I said that those original stories were canon to the Marvel Universe, but maybe not in the way that you'd think. That's because, as established in Defenders issue 89, the original Patsy Walker comics are canon as comics. What do I mean by that? Well, as we see in this issue, Patsy Walker's mom was a comic book creator, and the classic Patsy Walker comics were fictional stories that her mom wrote, inspired by her real, actual daughter. This is a retcon, of course, but it is a very clever one, and a great way to handle the canon and tone shifts over the decades. The classic Patsy Walker is canon. Canon in the sense that you can see Marvel characters go and pick up and read classic Patsy Walker comics. The stories in those comics are real enough. They are not actual things that happened in the history of the Marvel Universe, but they are inspired by true events. This recontextualizes a lot of Patsy's origin because she was not just a teen romance character, but she was a real teen celebrity. Patsy Walker was essentially a star actress, the main character in her mother's books, and the Patsy Walker comics were just as successful in the history of Marvel as they were in the history of the real world. People knew her, they knew Patsy, because they read these fictional stories about her, and that makes her arrogance and overconfidence work in a different way. Of course, she's a little bit delusional. She was extremely famous as a teenager, and that can have longer lasting effects as those people grow up into adulthood. This even adds more logic to her demanding that Beast make her a superhero. She had been a comic book star since she was a kid, not in the same genre, but a comic book star nonetheless. A point that I've said a few times and will return to a few more is that the overconfidence is the point of Patsy's character. She is a famous child star who wanted to become a superhero and then managed to do that against all odds. Is she really qualified for the job? No, but she's going to try her best. Sometimes it's going to work out, and sometimes it's not. This is what makes her interesting. With that little reveal, all the pieces should fall into place. You now have a decent idea of Hellcat's concept as a character, and the mysteries from this video's intro have been nailed down. However, there is one more big status quo change that Patsy Walker would see over the next couple of decades, and that's what the rest of this video is going to be about. She went from a teen romance character to a superhero character, and then she became a supernatural superhero character. See, in Patsy's time on the Defenders, she would meet another superhero, or maybe anti-hero is the better word, or sometimes straight up villain depending on the era. This is Damon Helstrom, otherwise known as the Son of Satan, and that name is quite literal. Damon is half demon. Technically, I guess his name is only partially literal, as his father is not Lucifer, but Marvel is often intentionally vague about using real-world religious figures in their books, so this doesn't really matter at the end of the day. He's the son of a big scary demon, that's enough. Slightly confusing as that codename may be given the circumstances, it is what he went with, and Son of Satan joined the Defenders after Patsy had been on the team for a while. Of course, Hellcat at this point had nothing to do with Hell other than her name, so her meeting Damon was just a happy coincidence. The pair would get closer over time, though not because of Patsy embracing the supernatural as her name would suggest, rather it was Damon who was cleansing himself from it. Shortly after joining the Defenders, Damon was able to purify his demonic half, and with the more dangerous parts of his heritage removed, he and Patsy decided to get married. And unfortunately, I'll go ahead and do a bit of a spoiler, the second marriage for Patsy is not going to go a lot better than the first. For one, their wedding was attacked by a weird villain named Mad Dog, and I know what you might be thinking, this just looks like an off-brand dog version of Hellcat. And yeah, you're completely right about that, because this is Buzz Baxter again. You know how I talked about Brand Corporation a lot when mentioning Buzz? Yeah, Brand Corporation's plans did not succeed, but that company was a subsidiary of Roxxon, Marvel's main evil megacorporation, and when Brand went down, apparently Buzz just went up the chain of command and was given superpowers by Roxxon experiments. Mad Dog's powers are biological, he has actually been physically modified, and while he is still incredibly bitter at his ex-wife, that is not the only reason that he's attacking the Defenders. Buzz is now working for the evil organization The Secret Empire, and his mental state has deteriorated a lot further. He and a couple other villains attack the wedding, Mad Dog goes right for Patsy and subdues her with a paralyzing bite, which is apparently part of his powers now, and then Damon beats the living hell out of the man, which is well deserved. Funny enough, this is not Mad Dog's last appearance. He does show up in Hellcat books from time to time, but he's also a separate villain of the week. He's fought Captain America on occasion, which means that this man's character arc began as 1940s teen romance love interest and ended at crazy fascist dog man. What a life. After this whole incident, the wedding continued and things would greatly improve for Patsy, at least for several years. Her and Damon would leave the Defenders and move to California for a quieter life, but they would not give up heroics entirely. Even after his purification, Damon retained a lot of his magical abilities and plenty of practice in the demonic, and in Patsy's case, she still had her psychic powers that were trained by Moondragon. This meant that while both of them were not active superheroes anymore, they continued operating in the space as paranormal investigators, which is a really fun status quo for these two. The idea of retired superheroes becoming paranormal investigators is a genius one, and I wish we got to see more of it. Unfortunately, Hellcat and Damon don't appear too much during this period. They can briefly be seen helping out teams like the West Coast Avengers though, and Patsy does keep the Hellcat suit, which she can put on when she needs it. If this is how they'd remained until the modern day, I would have been perfectly happy with that. They could appear on occasion as a fun callback, would have been a nice thing to have going forward. Unfortunately, the 90s. Hellcat's next major appearance would be in 1993's Helstrom Prince of Lies, unsurprisingly starring Damon, but rebranding him from Son of Satan to Hellstorm, because edgy 90s demon man, it makes enough sense. Hellstorm is... I mean, you can get a pretty good sense of this comic's vibe just by looking at the covers, which are not great. There's a lot going on here, I don't love any of it. Why is there a big laser in the background? And why is he getting crucified on a trident, but actually just kind of like off-center superimposed in front of it? Why is the title in 3 different fonts? I have no idea what's happening here, but this is just what the book is. And look, I know you're not supposed to judge a book by its cover. You can do that with this one though, because Hellstorm also takes the very fun idea of the pair being occult investigators and just kind of throws that in the garbage. And Patsy gets dragged into the garbage along with it. Evidently, in the years since the wedding, Damon was getting weaker, not just in his magical ability, but also in his regular life. Turns out that purifying his demon side was not without his consequences, and that magical imbalance within his form was slowly killing him. Patsy refuses to let another marriage end in tragedy and vows to save him, seeking out some dark magic resources to somehow restore his demonic half. This part is fine, that is in character for Patsy, jumping into things before really considering the consequences, and she is able to achieve her goal, though not without causing more problems. She brings Damon's demon half back, but in doing so ends up seeing the face of his true form, which drives her insane. And when I say insane, I mean it puts her into like a catatonic state and just kind of takes her out of the rest of the series. She's just here, not doing anything, being a tragic figure until issue 14 of Helstrom, where the Grim Reaper kills her. And then she's just gone for a bit. Thank God the video is not over, and this would be flipped into better storylines going forward. But yeah, this arc for Patsy is just bad. She doesn't even get to do any Hellcat stuff. She's just relegated to being Damon's wife, who then goes mad and dies. That's it. That's all she does in this comic. Patsy would remain narratively screwed over like this for 6 years. She would not have an appearance outside of flashbacks until 2000. But thankfully, in 2000, people decided to make the most of a bad situation and use Helstrom as a reason to double down on the Hell part of Hellcat's name. Some anniversary specials during this year reveal that when Patsy died, she got sent to the realm of Mephisto, but was able to escape years later due to a power struggle that was going on separately, and when she returned to the mortal realm, she had some demonic abilities of her own. She doesn't have like full-on hellfire or anything like that. Her powers are still on brand, just upgraded from spending time in hell. Patsy no longer relies on the cat costume, but she can summon it to her magically at any time. Additionally, and far more interestingly, she's also developed some anti-magic powers. This power is weirdly well defined, as Patsy does a whole monologue about it while she's beating up a bunch of minions. Apparently, while she was in hell, she fought in a place called the Arena of Tainted Souls, and doing that honed her soul to some sort of magical trained perfection. Then, when she was resurrected, her soul was reunited with her physical body, which had already been trained both physically and mentally by Moondragon. The combination of learning soul combat and physical combat separately has given Hellcat such a mastery over her existence in different forms that she can use her aura to dodge and block magical effects just like physical ones, which is a wild concept that I really like. Cool as this is, though, it might seem like too big of a departure from what Hellcat's concept originally was, and while it is a big shift, this comic does not abandon her origins entirely. In fact, it leans into them. Hellcat's first comic after being revived shows her returning to her hometown of Centerville, which was the setting of the original 1940s comics. Of course, it is a real place even in the Marvel Universe, though the fictionalized version that Patsy's mom wrote about probably doesn't resemble the real town. Except when Patsy goes there, it absolutely does. It turns out that with Patsy dead, the rights to all of her mother's old work had gone to another one of the book's stars, Hetty Wolf, who was also just a real person. Hetty had then capitalized on the old property by turning Centerville into a tourist attraction based on the classic Patsy Walker comics, and this tourist attraction had then been infested by demons. Thus, everything comes full circle, with a magically empowered Hellcat fighting evil monsters in a strange, distorted version of the original town from the real 1940s books. This is more or less the attitude that most writers take towards Hellcat going forward from here. Marvel has since embraced the fact that Patsy Walker's history is so chaotic, and uses that as an excuse to put her in a lot of different situations. Patsy has actually been in quite a few comics since 2000, a lot of various team-ups, a lot of classic Marvel tributes. She's gotten back to the Avengers, back to the Defenders, plenty of team-ups with She-Hulk specifically. Patsy and Jen are great friends, which should not be surprising considering both of their personalities. One of her longest appearances recently is as a main character in the Iron Man comic of 2020, where Patsy is Iron Man's primary love interest, calling all the way back to her first Marvel superhero appearance in Fantastic Four, where she says that she thinks Tony is hot. And now, decades later, as I promised, that finally happens for her. Tony actually proposes to Patsy during this, so the relationship got pretty far along, but she does end up rejecting the offer, citing her concerns over marriage after bad incidents in the past, which is understandable given her history. Her two ex-husbands are a sometimes evil half-demon and an abusive guy who ended up turning into a fascist dogman. She's not just relegated to these guest appearances and team-ups either, though. Hellcat has had 3 self-titled solo comics in recent decades, and they run the range in tone. Patsy Walker, aka Hellcat, from 2015, is a much more comedic series, which you can tell immediately from the art style alone. Patsy Walker Hellcat from 2008, which, yes, is a different comic from Patsy Walker aka Hellcat, is about her joining the 50 State Initiative in the aftermath of Civil War and being assigned to the Alaska team, as the only member of the Alaska team. This one is definitely less of a comedy book, but it is light-hearted superhero action for the most part, and marks a good midpoint between that and the most recent Hellcat series. This miniseries, simply titled Hellcat, is a surprisingly dark murder mystery, which expands on Patsy's supernatural elements and brings Patsy Helstrom back into things. It also features my favorite weird Marvel blorbo, Sleepwalker, as a main character. If you don't know who Sleepwalker is, he has a whole dedicated video on this channel that you should also go watch. To summarize him enough to intrigue you, he is a psychic entity from the Mindscape who now patrols the physical realm after being bonded to the brain of a mortal, and he also has one of the most interesting superpowers I've ever read. I need more people to appreciate him. Getting back on topic, I am skimming over most of Hellcat's recent history pretty quickly here, but that's just because this video is primarily about her origins and status quo changes, which are strange and complicated enough that I had to spend a lot of time on them. As we get closer to the end here, though, I do want to talk about how all of those changes contribute to the way that the character is now. There's an irony to this that I am well aware of, but somehow the fact that Hellcat has been through so many changes and had so many different status quos makes her more believable and cohesive as a character, at least in the context of the Marvel Universe. Her story is insane, the star of teen romance comic books going on to become a superhero, but in a world like Marvel, yeah, that would probably happen, and it would happen in this exact way. Patsy Walker did not gain her first powers because she was magically destined to have them, or because there were weird abnormalities in her DNA, or because she was experimenting with new technology, nothing like that. She was just in the right place at the right time. That's common for a lot of superheroes, but even characters like Peter Parker were around weird science when they got their abilities. Patsy was at home. She was just in her house, and Beast happened to go there. Sheer coincidence gave a person who wanted to be a superhero superpowers. And that is really it. For all the time I took explaining her origin, you can summarize it really nicely as that. Does she always deserve these abilities? No, not at all. Patsy is kind of dumb a lot of the time. Read any of her comics and the immediate vibe that you'll get from her is girl failure, which is a slang term that's only going to make sense to certain ranges of my viewer age demographic, but whatever, it is the most accurate term I can think of. Things do not always work out well for Hellcat. She's going to lose to villains, she's going to get framed for murder, she's going to die and go to hell on occasion. Even outside of her super heroic life, things will turn out badly. Details like making Buzz Baxter turn out to be abusive when he started as a perfect teen boy love interest add a fascinating layer of depth to Hellcat's character and make her feel more authentic as a human, not just a hero. Patsy is a very traumatized person from a lot of different sources, and as I've mentioned a couple times, the comics do not shy away from openly addressing that. But despite all of the horrible things she's experienced, she keeps being a superhero, A, because she likes helping people, but B, because she also just likes being a superhero. Hell, she's walked away from that life a couple times and always ends up coming back to it. She reads less like a character who was actively written to be a superhero, and more like a normal, average civilian of the Marvel Universe who then happened to get powers and enter that supernatural sphere. And yeah, I guess that's exactly what she actually is in real life. Boy, I love it when a character's narrative history parallels their publication history, and that really hits with Hellcat, because at the end of the day, it is very, very weird that Patsy Walker became a superhero, and you can take that phrase two different ways, because it's equally true in both of them. Thank you all so much for watching. As always, I hope you enjoyed. I don't think anybody was expecting a Hellcat video out of the blue from me, but people have been liking the real-world production elements of the videos lately, and if I was gonna do another one of those, Hellcat and Patsy Walker was an obvious choice. Announcements will be quick. First off, also as always, I have a Patreon. If you go and check that out, you can get early and ad-free access to all of my videos, as well as an exclusive video every month. My username there is the same as it is here. There's also a link on my channel page and in the description of this video, so it's very easy to find. And extra big thank you to people who already support me over there. It really does help me keep making these videos for you guys. One more shout out to Ruben Perez, the artist I work with on all of these videos. He drew the character that's been talking at you for the last 45 minutes or so. If you haven't checked out his work, go and do that. And now, the video's over. So you should go watch the Sleepwalker video that I mentioned earlier. Seriously, this is not a joke. If you don't know who Sleepwalker is, you should go and watch the video that I did on him. He is my favorite, and I need more people to know. Go appreciate my boy.